Okay, so the next question folks have for this month is a pretty big one. It's how has AI affected workers, the economy, and the environment? So let's get into it. Let's start by thinking through how AI might be impacting workers. And to do that, I'm going to think through two different scenarios. One scenario where a worker sells their labor time and works either at an hourly or salaried rate. Another where a worker maybe works for themselves and has clients and works at a piece rate. So if we're thinking about the worker who works hourly and their employer comes to them and says, okay, we're going to be implementing AI into our workflow. What AI can be in that scenario is very often a labor saving technology. That means you need less work hours to produce the same amount of product. That worker implements AI into their workflow and now they can write reports twice as fast, for example. Now, some might assume that that means the worker gets to work half as long and get paid for working 20 hours instead of 40. That is very often not the case. In fact, that's something that's going to be dependent on the underlying labor contract. If the employer has bought that labor time, bought those 40 hours a week, then they're going to expect 40 hours a week of work according to that contract. Until that contract changes, then that doesn't necessarily mean that that worker gets to work less. It just may mean that they have to implement that new technology into their workflow and produce twice as much. Now, you can contrast that with the worker who might work for themselves or works at piece rate. They can perhaps produce content twice as efficiently as they could before. That person may be able to get twice as much as compared to what they got without implementing the technology. And so that's another scenario where the underlying labor relationship is what is determining whether or not this new technology is going to be implemented in a way that is to the worker's benefit or is it to an employer's benefit. Even in the client-facing side, on the person who's working at piece rate, having an advantage by implementing this new technology, this new AI, might not last forever as their competitors start to implement that new technology as well, right? So it becomes sort of an arms race situation. So the extent to which this new technology, this AI, is going to be able to benefit a worker is ultimately going to be dependent on the underlying labor relationship that shapes how that person gets compensation. Now, this point about what the underlying labor relationship is applies to more than just AI, right? This is about how technology is introduced into economies in general. Whether or not the introduction of a new technology is to the benefit of workers or whether it's to the benefit of employers more directly, all that depends on what is the specific labor contract. Are there regulations in place that make sure that the gains that come from introducing a new technology are broadly and equitably shared? Again, that shapes whether or not a worker is able to benefit from this increased productivity. An example I like to use is the introduction of the cotton gin to the practice of cotton production and chattel slavery. This was a situation where the production of cotton became much more efficient. You didn't need as much time to produce the same amount of cotton given this new technology. Now, did that mean that those enslaved folks could now work for half the day instead of the entire day? No, of course not, because the underlying labor relationship didn't change. That oppressive system didn't change. So when a new technology is introduced to an economy and it makes things much more productive, what that can very often do is exacerbate the features of the current system. It magnifies those features. So in the case of AI, for example, AI will very likely enhance the characteristics of the current system as they are. If there are inequities in this current system, then introducing a new technology isn't going to magically erase those inequities. In fact, it may magnify those inequities. And I think that's something that we have started to see in which AI is implemented without there being proper guidelines and guardrails around making sure that that technology is introduced in an equitable way.